Hello, fellow bibliophiles, and welcome back to Blatantly Bookish. I'm Marissa, and today I thought that I would do the Reread tag, which was originally created by Roz from Scallydandling About the Books. This is a tag I've been meaning to do for a while. I think Katie from Books and Things actually tagged me in it back in the summertime, but I just wasn't ready to do it yet, and lately I've been thinking a lot about rereading and thought that it was quite an appropriate time to examine my rereading habits through this tag. So the first question is, let's assume you do reread if you're doing this tag, which I am, so yes. So where do you sit on the rereading scale from almost never to all the time? And I think I'm going to combine this with the second question, which is, has that changed over your reading life? So it used to be when I was very, very little, I would reread books all the time. Picture books, and they're really short to reread, so that's a very easy thing to do. And I think a lot of little kids will bring the same picture book to their parents again and again until they get sick of it. And it takes a long time for little kids to get sick of picture books. But then I entered this period of my life where the answer used to be almost never. I wouldn't pick up a book that I had read already because there were so many new books out there for me to explore. So I think really, since the time I started reading chapter books, I used to not reread pretty much at all. It's only lately, since I've started my channel and since I've been tracking my reading, and since I'm getting a little older, that I've started having this desire to reread my old favorites. I started keeping my current system of tracking my reading in 2018, and I looked back. In 2018, I only reread one book, and that was Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. And in 2019, I reread all of Harry Potter, and some Sense and Sensibility, Jane Eyre, and Carmilla, which I think I just reread because it was so short. And then in 2020, I reread quite a bunch of books, actually. Pride and Prejudice again, Emma, The Color Purple, The Secret Garden, and A Christmas Carol. And I'll get to some of the discussion as to why those books have been reread more frequently and such later in the questions. But for now, it's suffice to say that I have been thinking about rereading and considering the act of rereading more and more as I progress on in life. Question number 3, when do you reread? Maybe immediately after finishing a book, or not until years later, or when the mood strikes. So I don't think I've ever actually finished a book and reread it right away. There have been 2 times that I can recall this past year that I was tempted to do it, but never did. And that was The Other Bennet Sister and The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. Both of those made my best books of 2020 list, and both of those I was tempted to reread them for the same reason. I loved the experience of reading them so much that I wanted to relive that and I wanted to feel that again. But ultimately, I decided to simply stew on those books for a few days before moving on to another book instead. Usually, the most common frequency for me rereading a book is years later after the initial read, when I think about the book and I start to realize that I don't remember it very well, even though I remember this feeling of absolutely loving it. Or when the mood strikes. I mean, there are some books that I just see on my shelves and say, you know what, it's a good time to revisit that one. Or I see someone on BookTube raving about a book I've already read, and they make me want to revisit it. Question number 4, why do you reread books? And I think this really gets at the heart of the matter. For me, the most frequent reason I reread a book is because of comfort and familiarity. These books are like a big security blanket for me. There are certain books that I just want to come back to again and again. It's like revisiting old friends. In fact, there are certain books that when I went to dental school, I took with me, and it's not because I thought I would have this abundant amount of time to read in dental school, which of course I didn't. Dental school is quite time consuming, but just having these books on my shelves made me feel safe and secure and at home. And just the idea, this possibility that I could revisit these books anytime I wanted to, theoretically, was just such a comfort to me. And in some ways, that's why I acquire certain books that I loved so much. I like to keep them on my shelves and remind myself that they're there for me if and when I should need them. In the past, I've also reread books, of course, because I was studying them and they happened to be on the syllabus and I'd already read them in the past. So those, of course, were rereads. And I think that there's also something to be said for calling something your favorite book and yet not remembering much about it. I feel like if I don't frequently reread my favorites, I have no right to call them my favorite books. And I worry that I won't be able to converse eloquently about them anymore. So I think that's a big part of my rereads as well. Question number 5. How do you reread? Faster? Slower? Just the best bits? So I think I usually read at a pace that's similar to the first read, if not slower. It depends why I'm rereading. If it's just for pure enjoyment and it's not a very dense book, I think it'll be about the same pace as the initial read. If it's because I want to gain a deeper understanding of the book and I'm sitting there with a pencil in hand trying to annotate the book, it may actually take me longer as I sit and pause and think and jot some notes down and move on. In terms of just the best bits, I rarely consider that rereading. Occasionally, when I'm going to make a video about a favorite book of mine, I'll revisit passages that I've dog-eared in the past and just read little bits, but I wouldn't say the best bits, and I don't think I would really consider that rereading. Of course, when I was in school and I was doing essays and things like that, and I had assignments where I wanted to pick out some quotes, I would skim through passages of the books, but I, again, wouldn't call that rereading, even though technically I guess I would be rereading bits of the text. But yeah, it just never crossed my mind that that counted as rereading a book. I also think it's really great to reread books on audiobook. I've lately come to appreciate audiobooks a little more, but I really only listen to them while I'm driving, and sometimes I find it overwhelming to listen to a news story while driving. You know, if I need to focus on a specific difficult left turn, or I'm stuck at an intersection and I really need to focus, I sometimes miss the plot and miss what's going on in a story. So I find that nonfiction books or books I've already read in the past are the best audiobooks to listen to. Question number 6. Who or what do you reread? More specifically, which authors or genres or individual books? So I think I mostly reread the genres of children's fiction and classics or Victorian literature. My favorite books to reread are probably Jane Austen's works. I think they just stand up to infinite amounts of rereads. Every time I reread her work, I get something new and exciting from the text, a different interpretation of a character or a plot line. And books like that are wonderful to reread. You never tire of them. It's like those questions, you know, which books would you bring to a deserted island? And you imagine that you're going to be sitting there on the deserted island, having nothing to do, rereading them over and over again. And you want something that will hold your attention, that you'll never get sick of. And for me, those books are pretty much Jane Austen. And the Brontes. There's a reason I'm doing the Bronte project this year. And that's actually part of why I decided to do this tag, is I realized that this year is going to be full of a lot of rereads. Between the Bronte project and a few other buddy reads I'm doing, I'm tempted to reread so many books. The more I look on my shelves, the more I see old favorites that I barely remember. And all I can think about when I look at them is, oh, I loved that book so much, but I can't really carry on much of a conversation about it or express why I loved it. Question number 7, is there a book that you found better when you reread it? For me, a lot of books are, I wouldn't say better exactly when you reread them, but your understanding of them deepens, and that increases your fondness for the book, and you just get a different understanding of the text. So I don't know if better is the right word, because to me, there are certain books that you can never recapture that first reading experience you had with them. I think every time you reread certain books, there is an added layer of richness to your experience with that book. And your understanding of the book deepens, your knowledge of the book deepens, and your knowledge of yourself deepens. I think in some ways it's you that changes and not the book. And as you grow up and as your worldview expands, you're able to read new things into books and at the same time remember what you used to feel and why. And so I think rereading is just this wonderful reflective experience to better understand the books, yes, but also better understand yourself. Question number 8 is asking for a book that was worse when you reread it. And I don't know that I have one. I don't reread books that I don't think I'm going to like a second time. And so I don't know if any book was worse, but I definitely have had some childhood crushes shattered on rereads. Mr. Rochester and Mr. Darcy are the two foremost heroes that come to mind that I had major crushes on when I was a teenager and first read the book. And then as I reread the books multiple times, I found some deep-seated problems with their character and with being so obsessed over them. So it's fun to remember how I used to feel while reading the books and while watching the romances develop. But for me, looking back on these texts, there are red flags for those relationships that I just can't ignore. And then question number 9, which one book have you reread the most times? And for me, I think this is definitely either Wuthering Heights, Jane Eyre, Pride and Prejudice, maybe Little Women. All of those books are my top rereads. Jane Eyre, I think I've reread every year. No, I just reread it the past 2 years on audiobook. Wuthering Heights, I've reread twice so far since starting my channel, and I must have read it at least 2 or 3 times before that. Pride and Prejudice, again, all of these are not tied. I'm sure one of them is the winner, but I just don't know which. I'm not that good at tracking my reading over the years. Each of those books have been read upwards of 4, 5, 6 times in my life, and I love all of them for such different reasons. Little Women has probably only been read 3 or 4 times now that I think about it. So that is it for this tag. It's been a really interesting experience actually thinking about all of these books that I love to reread, and there are actually a lot more that I want to add to this list. Talking about rereading has made me want to reread even more, and I'm beginning to wonder if 2021 will be the year of rereads for me, unofficially speaking. There's definitely going to be a lot of rereading happening this year for me with the Bronte Project, and there are so many books on my shelves that I'm dying to reread. I might make a whole video on them at some point and why I'd like to reread them. I know that there's going to be a read-along of Once Upon a River with Katie from Books and Things in February, and I am definitely going to do that. That was a wonderful book, and Diane Setterfield is one of the few contemporary authors who I have reread her works. So I'm excited for that. I think I'm going to reread Precious Bane by Mary Webb this year, and that is a book that I think I read when I was too little. I reread the back of the book briefly, and there were a lot of things I realized just from rereading the back in the present day that I'm looking back and realize I was confused about or didn't quite understand when I first read it. This tag has been going around on BookTube quite a lot in the past, but if you are watching this and you haven't done this tag yet and you see it and you want to, please consider yourself tagged. I would love to hear all your thoughts about rereading books in the comments down below. Do you reread? How often do you reread? What are your favorite books to reread? Please do let me know, and until next time, I look forward to seeing you in another video very soon. Bye!